This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I am here with wine writer Konrad Ejbich, a man who has certainly been around the block a few times. How are you today, sir?
I am fine. And how are you, Jamie?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for inviting me into your home for this interview today. Now, we'll start at the very beginning. Can you remember your very first experiences of wine?
Of wine, not of tasting, but of wine. I'll go beyond that because this one already came to me later. And that my first experience with tasting was when I was 12 years old, and with my friend we decided to buy some cigarettes. Okay, and there were two different varieties of menthol. They had Cools and they had Alpines, and we only had enough. We had enough money for both, but we decided to buy both. I chose to buy both so that we could taste them and decide which one we liked better. It was 12 years old. I never thought about it till later. Tasting was this is an interesting thing. I didn't really discover tasting. I found wine out of greed. Okay, in 1974, the government imposed wage and price controls, and the Ontario government came along and said, okay, we're freezing all prices, including liquor board. Well, 3 years later, they were selling some wines for less than they were paying for them because in the world, wages and prices had not been controlled, but here they had because of the economy. And the finance minister of the province, Frank Miller, at the time announced that he would be removing the price controls in 3 weeks, following 3 weeks with the budget. And that gave me an opportunity to think, well, if I go and spend $100, within 3 weeks, I might have $200 worth of wine.
So it was an investment.
So it was totally it was completely an investment. And I started going to liquor stores in Ontario and asking which of the wines should I buy. And at the time, we're talking the late 70s, and most of the managers were old guys with anchor tattoos on their arms and said, "Screw that guy, go get some rum, get some real good juice." But I was living in Ottawa at the time, so I decided what I would try to do is go to the liquor stores in Quebec and compare the prices with the liquor stores in Ontario, because Quebec had never agreed to the price controls and it's a normal market. But there were totally different products there. The bottom line was that I found a guy in Quebec who started exciting me about wine. Not just about the price of it, but the value of what was in the bottle. And Richard Charbonneau got me excited about wine, started showing me Bordeaux's, great Bordeaux's and Burgundies, because that's all that the wine business was at the time. It was Bordeaux's, Burgundies, Alsace, Champagne, Hock, and Chianti.
I was about to ask you what was on the LCBO shelves, or rather behind the counter of the LCBO at that time.
Well, you could buy Chateau Mouton Rothschild 1970 for $22.20.
Oof.
I bought 4 bottles.
Okay.
And that was such. I didn't tell my wife because she would have killed me for spending so much money. Okay, and the average cost of a bottle of wine at the time would have been $3.85.
Ooh.
Okay, $4.20 if you wanted really good stuff. Okay, so
what
$22.
What kind of wines would those be?
We're talking about a white. Well, my first job in the wine business came 3 years later when I joined Mark Anthony Wine Merchants, and the first wine I sold was called Saint-Jovien. Saint-Jovien was a liter of Bordeaux, really good white Bordeaux, for $4.20. Okay, and we also had an Austrian wine, a really good Gruner Veltliner, blended with a little bit of ferment and Gewürz, and it was $5.65. And it was terrific wine.
So the Austrians had presence in the market even back then.
They did. It was a few years later that the ethyl glycol scandal, diethylene glycol scandal, completely eliminated my market. In fact, when that scandal came out, the TV cameras went into the liquor stores and they focused on the prettiest Austrian label was there. It was my bottle, Magic Flip.
So you're basically screwed.
And that was the day our sales ended. That day our sales ended. Not a single bottle was sold after that. We basically pulled back from the market.
So you were in sales at that point with Mark Anthony.
I was hired as a sales rep. and very quickly turned into the Ontario marketing manager, because
Right.
the guy who hired me moved to Vancouver, where they ran the major part of the company, and they were sort of trying to build the market here. At the time, the liquor board had a single buyer, okay, didn't have a committee, and that buyer decided everything.
Wow.
And that buyer decided he did not like Anthony Von Mandel, my boss. And so for 4 years, I was working at trying to get new listings, trying to get things in, and he would not give us the time of day.
So when it came to sales and marketing, you were selling mainly to the LCBO. Were there
I was doing
restaurants?
everything. I was selling to the liquor board. I was selling to restaurants,
Oh,
to
I wonder,
hotels,
right.
privately. We're trying to do private stock orders. There was no consignment at the time. So you had to do a private stock order where you got
Right.
the order, you convinced somebody to buy it, and they would actually get it 6 months later after
Yeah.
having
Yeah.
paid for it 6 months earlier.
Oh, I've
That was the business.
experienced
That
with
was the business. One of the fun parts of the business I really loved was introducing Beaujolais Nouveau.
Okay.
When I joined the company, my boss, Ken Chase, who was the intermediary between Anthony and myself,
Yes, yep.
and Anthony created the Beaujolais Nouveau phenomenon in Canada. So one year they came in, they got some pictures in the paper holding the bottle up in the air. We're first, we're great. Nobody else had any. So they beat them by just being the only ones.
Yes.
Well, the following year, it was my job to try to convince the public and the restaurant trade to buy Beaujolais Nouveau. And I was able to sell 15 cases into some of the top accounts, which they were expensive at the time because we had to air freight them in. The only way to get it in was quickly, was to air freight it.
And you were able to do that legally.
We were
Right.
with
Interesting.
good brokers, with permission, with everything, all LCBO papers ahead of time. And I was privileged to fly over there and bring them back and do the PR.
So into
Right,
Lyon.
so I
Lyon,
came,
yeah.
as I'm coming off the plane with a bottle of Beaujolais Nouveau, global TV and a couple of
Very
cameras flashing things, was in the paper all day. And then within the next 3 weeks, the restaurants were calling me, "We're going to get some of this." Where I said, "I gave you your chance, you didn't get any." Right. The following year I sold 1,000 cases. And the following year, the liquor board jumped on the bandwagon, closed everything off, sold 3,000 cases, but it started going down after that because they had to control everything instead of
Interesting.
letting it run. Free enterprise. And
So